My mom's cooking is way better than yours. While some leaned back on the dining chairs and others sat up straight, the four of us gathered around a table full of delicious dishes. Normally, we wouldn't have such a fancy meal, but today we were eating with my in-laws. Keith, smirking even while eating, looked at me and said, "But I made that dish. Your usual bad cook." I responded to Keith's comment and then glanced at my parents-in-law to see their reactions. "What did you say?" My parents-in-law looked confused. The atmosphere grew tense. For a moment, it felt like time stopped, and everyone just sat there, unable to move or speak, with their forks in their hands. I thought it was time to stop hiding my feelings. I didn't want to keep up my relationships with Keith and his parents while secretly feeling so unhappy. I was ready to fight back. I had planned my revenge on Keith for a long time, and today was the day. That's why I left our daughter, Naomi, with my parents. I didn't want her to see this ugly side of things or get upset by the conversation. I was determined to reach my goal and felt secretly pleased about it. My name is Rachel Davis. I'm 34 years old, and my daughter, Naomi, just started elementary school. I'm a typical housewife, living a comfortable life. Even though I call myself typical, I married into a wealthy family, so I can enjoy some luxury. However, I wasn't overly greedy. All I wanted was to be happy with my husband, Keith. Most people would think we have a happy life, but there was one thing that troubled me. Keith, who is 39 this year, had been coming home late more often recently. He's always had late nights since we got married because he works at a big company and has a lot of responsibilities. I figured his job kept him busy, so I didn't complain. Plus, on his days off, Keith would spend time with Naomi and sometimes take us on family trips. Keith had never complained since we got married. Even though he often felt stressed from work, he always tried his best. I thought it wouldn't be fair to suspect him of something like infidelity. In many families, stress and complaints can lead to arguments, but that wasn't the case for us. Keith didn't have bad habits like drinking too much or being mean. He was quite respectable. Sometimes I admired him, thinking that people from good families tend to have good manners. However, something changed this year. Sometimes he would respond to me in a distant way, even when I talked about ordinary things. Recently, he started spending more time on his smartphone, and our conversations became less frequent. I thought it might be due to work, so I didn't question him about it. One weekday evening, our daughter Naomi came home from elementary school and said, "Daddy was with someone I don't know." Upon hearing Naomi's statement, I stopped slicing vegetables in the kitchen. "What do you mean?" I hadn't planned on asking Naomi about such things, but with Keith's recent strange behavior, doubts had started creeping in. I was curious, so I gently probed for more information from Naomi. "What did this person look like? Was it a woman?" "I don't know," Naomi replied. "Okay, how old did she seem to be?" "Probably around your age, Mom." "All right, thanks." With that limited information, I couldn't be sure if Keith was cheating. Given his high position, it could have been work-related, but something felt off. Troubled by this uneasy feeling, I decided to go somewhere specific the next day. "I'm sorry for bringing this up suddenly," I apologized. "No, it's okay. I understand the situation with your husband now. What exactly would you like me to look into?" Timothy asked. Lost in my thoughts while sitting on the couch, I watched as Timothy spread out some documents on the glass table in front of me. "We have a plan where we can take photos for evidence or have our staff interact closely with your husband to gather information, and then," Timothy explained the details carefully. "I think I'd like to go with this option," I said, pointing to the plan outlined in the documents, nodding in agreement. "I'm currently in the city, having visited a detective agency located in a back alley not far from downtown. Across from me sits Timothy Rogers, dressed in a black suit, the detective assigned to my case. Since yesterday, I've been plagued by a persistent suspicion that Keith might be cheating on me. Reluctantly, I turned to a professional detective. Doubting my husband, with whom I've shared my life for several years, wasn't something I could easily discuss with anyone else. Yet the need to uncover the truth outweighed my reservations, and I recounted the events leading up to our meeting. "So, what kind of work does your husband usually do?" Timothy inquired. "He's in a managerial role in sales at a major corporation, like a department head or something." "Yes, something along those lines. But right now, I prefer not to disclose the company's name. Is that all right? I wanted to keep things low-key and avoid involving people who weren't directly connected to what was happening between Keith and me. I understand. Depending on how things progress, we may need that information, but for now, Timothy paused to clarify. Just to confirm, does your husband typically work at the company's main office or at a sales branch? I believe it's the sales branch, I replied, trying to recall. Got it. If he's based at the company, knowing the name would help. I can tell you, but only if you promise not to share it with anyone. Timothy looked a bit nervous as he handed me a pen, and I quickly wrote down the name on the notepad he had placed on the table. This company is pretty big, or rather well known. Yes, exactly. That's why I didn't want to mention it. Can you please keep it confidential? Absolutely. We don't want to cause any trouble for the company. This is strictly about your personal situation. Timothy nodded solemnly, took a deep breath, and continued our discussion. 2 weeks passed since then. I returned to the detective agency and met with Timothy again. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your husband is indeed cheating. Oh, I see. I widened my eyes in surprise, and at the same time, I sighed as if resigning myself to the truth. I was hurting inside. What had been a small suspicion had now become a painful reality, yet I felt a sense of duty to face it. It was this mix of emotions that kept me outwardly composed. What's the next step? Should we continue the investigation further? Yes, please. That would mean getting more deeply involved. Are you sure about that? Timothy asked cautiously. Yes, I replied firmly. Even though my heart felt heavy, I was determined to uncover the truth, so I nodded slowly. So the affair is confirmed now? I asked, needing confirmation. Yes, unfortunately. There were times when your husband was living with the woman he had the affair with, Timothy replied somberly. I see. So those times he didn't come home late because of work, but to be with his mistress. Knowing this made anger surge within me, I admitted bitterly. Do you want to see the photographic evidence now, or would you prefer to see it later? You can also choose not to see it, Timothy offered carefully. Show it to me, I said firmly, despite the turmoil inside me. Are you sure? He asked, concerned. Yes, please show it to me, I replied with a trembling voice. Timothy retrieved a photo from a brown envelope and handed it to me. As I looked at it, I saw Keith entering his mistress's house. Naomi hadn't been mistaken. The woman appeared to be around my age, but slightly younger and attractive. Keith seemed happier with her than with me. Naomi was only in first grade, and the thought of divorce pained me, but I couldn't bear to stay with a cheating husband. If this affair harmed Naomi in any way, I knew I had to act now. I looked at the photo again, suppressing my hurt, and made my decision. I need as much information as possible, I said firmly. All right then, we'll conduct an investigation over the next 2 months. Is that acceptable to you? Timothy asked. Yes, I have the funds for it. Please proceed, I replied, meeting Timothy's gaze. Hey, don't be saying such things. All you're doing is lying, came a voice. No, it's the truth. I am now at Keith's parents' house with Naomi not present, allowing me to respond fully to Keith's statements. I have not lied or deceived my parents-in-law. What's wrong with telling the truth? And there's no benefit for me in lying, I assert. A few days ago, Timothy completed his investigation and handed me a report, which I now have in a bag beside me. With this evidence, Keith won't be able to deny his actions, and once it's presented, his parents should understand. However, I need to approach this carefully, knowing Keith is capable of deceiving even those closest to him. I plan to reveal the truth to his parents while carefully observing the situation. You're crazy. My son would never cheat. You're just making up lies like Keith said. It's rude to accuse him falsely. Robert's voice boomed from inside the room. Moments ago, we were all chatting pleasantly, but a small disagreement between Keith and me had quickly turned the atmosphere tense. I had simply mentioned that Keith had been coming home late for the past 6 months, but he immediately became defensive and accused me of lying. I knew I had provoked this, but my resentment towards him ran deep. I had come to this gathering with a sense of needing to confront him. Keith said you can't even handle basic household chores properly. You're just sitting at home, doing nothing, Robert continued, his voice sharp. That's a misunderstanding, I replied firmly. A misunderstanding? Are you calling my son a liar? Yes, I affirmed, keeping my composure despite Robert's intimidating stare. That's absurd. My son is exceptional. I've given him the best education and upbringing. I taught him respect and responsibility. He wouldn't do something like cheat, Robert insisted adamantly. Robert's refusal to accept Keith's actions stemmed from his ignorance of the truth. His demeanor grew more tense by the moment. I was poised to present the evidence and reached for my bag. I used to trust you, but not anymore after this, Susan interjected with disappointment in her voice. Susan had always been kind. When I arrived early at their home today, she greeted me warmly. It was Susan who had initially encouraged Keith to marry me, owing to our mother's long-standing friendship. Yet now, Susan regarded me with suspicion, as if I were a criminal. If things are this bad, we might have to consider divorce, Susan sighed, her words heavy with resignation. I hadn't wanted divorce to be mentioned. Our family runs a prominent company. If people find out that someone like you is married to my son, especially since Keith is set to become CEO in about 10 years, it will reflect poorly on us. Susan continued, her tone direct but her expression apologetic. Plus, she can't even cook properly and is cheating. That's not true. I cook just fine. I defended myself. Really? Your cooking tastes awful, Susan retorted. In that room, where tension hung thick, Keith casually picked up his fork, took a piece of grilled fish from the table, and started eating. His arrogant demeanor grated on my nerves. You know, Mom's cooking is way better than yours, Keith remarked with a laugh. What? That was made by me though, wasn't it? Your usual mistress whose cooking is awful, I muttered in stunned disbelief at Keith's remark. The atmosphere in the room turned tense instantly. Excuse me. Both sets of parents-in-law looked shocked, mouths hanging open. Keith's eyes widened as he dropped the grilled fish he had picked up with his fork onto the table. What are you saying? Susan's voice quivered with surprise. Just what I said, I replied calmly to Susan's question. As I've been saying, the one lying here is my husband. Stop making up stories. Keith slammed his fork down, his voice rising. It's not true. Besides, I cooked that grilled fish this morning when I arrived, not your mother. You and your father wouldn't know since you came later in the afternoon, I explained, maintaining my composure. Keith's irritation grew, and his face flushed red with anger. You have evidence? Keith challenged, standing up from his seat. Yes, I do. I'll show you, I asserted firmly. What? No, you're lying. This is nonsense. Keith protested vehemently. It's true. I'm serious, I asserted firmly, meeting Keith's eyes with an unusually serious expression. Well, anyway, I haven't done anything wrong, Keith muttered, sitting back down quietly. You understand the consequences if this turns out to be true, right? Robert's voice rang out angrily. Let's calm down first. Does Rachel really have evidence? Susan interjected, trying to diffuse the escalating tension. In that moment, Susan was the voice of reason. I retrieved an envelope from my bag and placed photos, along with a letter-sized paper from Timothy, the detective, on the table. Keith's face paled as he watched me lay out the evidence. No, this isn't what it looks like, Keith protested desperately, refusing to face the truth. What's going on? What does all of this mean? Robert demanded, but Keith covered his ears in a futile attempt to block out the truth. What are these? These photos. Who is this person? Are you really cheating? Robert demanded, shocked and dismayed. Yes, that's correct. That's why I had these photos taken as evidence. This is not fabricated. I've also spoken with a lawyer, so if we decide to divorce, it will be handled legally. I stated firmly, my resolve unwavering. I was determined to hold Keith accountable. This could damage the reputation of my company. Robert's voice wavered. The confidence he had shown earlier seemed to fade away. What's the truth here? This isn't my fault, Keith muttered defensively. At Susan's question, Keith covered his face with both hands, unwilling to confront the reality before him. However, he couldn't deny the undeniable evidence any longer. Keith's distressed expression slowly gave way, and it became clear he was starting to regain his composure. All right, I'll talk, Keith slumped, appearing exhausted. He struggled to find the right words. I did cheat, but it's not entirely my fault. Keith began to justify himself from the beginning. I had someone I loved before, Keith admitted. Loved. I was taken aback. Keith had never mentioned this before. Since when? I pressed. Before I met you, before Mom introduced you to me, Keith confessed. So why did you choose to marry me then? I asked, feeling a mix of hurt and confusion. Because it looked good socially, Keith admitted reluctantly. Then he turned to his parents, his expression troubled. What do you mean by that? I asked, trying to comprehend Keith's explanation. Dad wanted me to get married soon, so I was set up with someone Mom recommended, Keith explained, his voice strained. So if you love someone else, why didn't you tell me? I questioned, feeling hurt and betrayed. Because I knew you would criticize me, Keith admitted reluctantly. Who is this person you love? Robert demanded angrily. The suspicion he had harbored towards me now shifted to Keith, and he banged the table with his right hand, demanding the full story. It was someone I met about 10 years ago. She worked at a nightlife spot, but given that my father runs a major company, I couldn't openly discuss it, Keith confessed, his tone resigned. A nightlife spot? Well, in that case, I probably would have opposed the marriage, Robert muttered with frustration and disappointment. Indeed, Keith admitted. Yes, Dad, so it's not entirely my fault. In truth, I wanted to marry her. Keith dropped a bombshell, revealing the truth I had never known. I was left speechless. We had lived together for years, had a child together, but Keith had never truly loved me. It was a devastating realization. She said it would be okay if we got married this year, so I saw it as my chance, Keith continued, explaining himself. Chance? Chance for what? What are you talking about? Susan, who had been listening intently, interjected with confusion. It was my last opportunity to marry her, and I thought if I spoke poorly of Rachel, Dad and Mom would agree to our divorce, Keith confessed bitterly. I'm tired of all of it, the societal pressures and expectations. I just want a simple life. I'd rather spend my life with that woman than with our family. Keith spoke with a raw honesty I had never heard from him before. Despite my hurt, I felt a twinge of sympathy, realizing the stress he had been under all these years. But it also became clear that our relationship had only been a facade, lacking any genuine love. So, what are you going to do about our marriage? I asked, my voice trembling. I'm going to get a divorce, Keith replied, his decision final. Do you have any idea how much money I've spent on you? Robert's anger escalated, his frustration palpable. Hey, please stop, I interjected, trying to ease the tension. What, you're siding with him now? Robert snapped back, his anger directed towards me. It's not about taking sides. We've never heard his true feelings before. He's always followed our advice and done what was expected, even since his college days, I explained, hoping to bring some perspective. And what about my business? I won't accept it unless he marries someone suitable, Robert continued, his fury unabated. I'm sorry, Keith's voice trembled with pain. Just saying sorry won't fix this, Robert retorted harshly. But isn't it enough that he's finally being honest with us? Susan interjected gently, her voice soothing the heated atmosphere. I'm filing for divorce, so what about taking over my company? What's your decision? Robert demanded, his expression stern and unwavering. I can't take it over anymore, Keith replied quietly, his resolve clear despite the turmoil. I see. So are you prepared to take full responsibility? Robert asked, seeking a final confirmation. It might be tough, but I'll manage, Keith replied with a hint of uncertainty. Then do as you please. I won't interfere. From today, you're no longer part of this family. Remember that, Robert declared firmly, his disappointment evident as he left the dining table and exited the room. I'm truly sorry, Keith turned to me with regret in his eyes, pleading for forgiveness. But despite his apology, I couldn't forgive him for the turmoil he had caused in my life. I was resolute about getting a divorce and securing child support to move forward. I contacted the attorney I had spoken with earlier that day, and the process of divorcing Keith began the following day. A few months have passed since then, and I feel like my life has improved, even though it's not as comfortable as before. Despite the challenges, I'm in a better place now. Mom, I'm off to school, Naomi called out. Take care, honey, I replied. Naomi is now in 2nd grade, and I'm navigating life as a single mom. I had to return to work, but it's a far cry from living with Keith, who never truly loved me. After seeing Naomi off to school, I head to work. Interestingly, the company I work for is managed by my father-in-law. We've reconciled, and they've been incredibly supportive, helping me in various ways at work. It turned out that much of what Keith had claimed was untrue, and his parents have apologized for his behavior. Thanks to their support, I was able to join this company. However, after our divorce was finalized, Keith moved in with the person he had an affair with and never returned. He's been consistent with child support payments, given his financial stability. Through hearsay, I've heard he's been wandering the streets late at night, looking worn and troubled. I'm unsure about his current relationship with the person he cheated with, but it no longer concerns me. My focus now is on providing for Naomi and building a stable future for us. Letting go of the past, I've taken the first steps toward a new life.